Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Becky Simon with the League of Women Voters of Naperville. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. We do not support or oppose candidates for public office, but we do advocate on issues. Tonight, we'll be talking about the new maps for Illinois' congressional districts. It's important to note that we will not be talking about county district maps or the issues around the possible recommended DuPage County Forest Preserve District maps. Tonight, we are just talking about the Illinois Congressional District maps. Now, I'll hand you off to our moderator, Kelly Mahoney. Kelly?
Thank you, Becky. Hi, all. It's nice to have you here. I would like to, and I'm very excited to introduce Madeleine Doubek. So Madeleine, if you'd like to come on screen. Just a few points before we get started. One thing is, if you could keep yourselves muted unless you have a question, or if you'd like to ask that question, please use the chat function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And if you just keep yourself muted, it'll kind of help us just make sure that we can focus the conversation. But we're definitely open to having a live dialogue, and we'll definitely make room for any questions. Just use that chat function or raise your hand if you have anything to add. So Madeleine, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We're excited to talk to you tonight about this very important topic around Illinois redistricting. And I know that you are the subject matter expert when it comes to this. So the way that we thought we would proceed tonight is that I will be interviewing Madeleine. And we have a few preceded questions just to kind of help the conversation flow about the things that we think are on everybody's mind. So hopefully during this time, you'll learn something. It may prompt you to, again, like ask or go deeper. And I would just say, please don't be shy. So Madeleine, would you just like to start with an overview of what is congressional redistricting for our audience?
Sure. So every 10 years in the United States, we conduct a census. And then after that census is produced and tallied and released, every government in the state, in the nation, is required by law to draw new district boundaries if it's a government that doesn't have at-large districts. And so that, of course, includes congressional districts as well. And so each state does that. And in Illinois, it's the Illinois legislature that oversees that process. As part of that census process, every 10 years, the Census Bureau releases counts for each state. And every 10 years since 1950, Illinois has lost a congressional district because of shifts in population. Illinois lost a little bit of population, not nearly as much as had been predicted, but other states gained so much population, and we have a set number of seats in the United States House, 435. So those seats have to be apportioned based on population, because the whole point of remapping and redistricting is so that there's an accurate reflection of population in each different geography. And so as a result of this census and this cycle, Illinois went from having 18 congressional districts down to 17. So just very recently, a few weeks ago, the Illinois General Assembly, the House and the Senate, went through a very quick process of holding some hearings and listening to some testimony from people like us at Change Illinois, and drew 4 different drafts of congressional maps, went through different drafts very quickly, and then voted on them during their fall veto session, which was just held a few weeks ago. That map has been sent to Governor Pritzker for his consideration. We're anticipating that he will sign it. It will become the law of the land, and then there may be lawsuits that follow that, challenging that map.
So just a couple of follow-up questions on that. So you did answer a few of our questions. So this happens every 10 years, Madeleine?
That's correct. After each census to reflect the shifts in population.
And the going down 18, down 1 to 17, what does that mean for the Illinois voter?
Well, you know, an individual voter may not notice very much of a change, but boundaries change as a result, representation changes as a result. You could make the argument that Illinois has a little bit less clout in Congress and power because we have one fewer representative in that US House chamber. This particular go-round, what was happening in Illinois was very much uppermost in the minds of the leaders in the United States House, particularly the Democratic leadership, because they have such a slim majority in the United States House right now. They were very concerned with how these district lines were drawn, and they wanted them drawn in a way that maximized their chances of keeping that majority in the House in this next election that we'll have next year.
And so that didn't happen, obviously, because we lost a district.
No, it did happen because they very much what they were concerned about was how, you know, were the districts going to be drawn in such a way that they could maximize the numbers within that 17 of Democrats they expect to be elected, because there's a Democratic majority in the US House right now. So we went from having, I believe it's, I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. I believe it's 5 Republicans currently. And now they're anticipating and predicting that it will go down to 3 in the US House delegation from Illinois. 14 Democrats, 3 Republicans.
Can you speak more? Thank you for that. Can you speak more to the process to redistrict?
Sure. So after the census, typically in March, after the census is taken, the data is released to each state that has population counts down to the block level, which is not the same as the block you live on, but it's maybe a little bit bigger than that. Whomever happens to be in charge of redistricting in each state takes that data and then normally would use it as the basis for drawing those districts. In the case of Congress, there is a requirement that those districts be almost precisely equal or pretty precisely equal in population. So now that we have 17 districts instead of 18, the actual numbers of people in each of those districts will go up a little bit. You know, another thing to think about is that these districts have gotten, in some cases, to be pretty crazy looking and sprawling, and it's going to take those members of Congress a long time to get from one end of their district to another to try to meet with their constituents. So that makes it challenging for the individual voter.
And there's a question around, is there somebody that governs or oversees this process of redistricting?
Yeah, so it is in the Illinois Constitution that it is handled by the Illinois General Assembly. And because the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate and the governor's office are currently all held and controlled by Democrats, they are in charge and they wield the power and they drew the districts to maximize their party's control. Now, I've been, you know, paying attention to this and watching it for decades. I previously was a reporter and editor at the Daily Herald and covered redistricting in 1990 when Republicans had control of the process. And they were the ones who were trying to maximize the advantage for their party in Illinois at that time. So, gerrymandering, drawing districts to try to maximize one party's control over the other is definitely something that both major political parties have done for centuries.
So that kind of gets to, how are we ensuring this process of redistricting is transparent and fair?
That is, in fact, what we fight for at Change Illinois every day. And unfortunately, I have to say we've been losing that battle. This year, we redistricted both the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate and our congressional seats. And the hearings for that whole process started on St. Patrick's Day. And you will hear your state representatives and state senators talk about how there were more hearings than ever before. But I'm going to guess that probably nobody listening to us talk this evening knew much about these hearings, paid any attention, got involved in the hearings. All of them, literally all of them, were held during most people's working hours. Very little was done to advertise them and to engage the public in this process. And these lawmakers went about drawing the lines for Illinois House, Illinois Senate, and US Congress so that they could determine what the outcomes of the elections would be, and so that it would serve their political purposes in the majority party and not what the people might want. And so there wasn't a great deal of fairness or equity or transparency. In fact, I know Becky said we're focusing on congressional districts, but I do need to tell you a little bit about the Illinois House and Senate. They drew those maps twice, because the first time they did it without the benefit of the actual census data, despite groups like Change Illinois and other good government groups asking them not to do that. And they drew maps based on another Census Bureau product that's called the American Community Survey, which is kind of a 4-year rolling sample. It's a very useful piece of data, but it's not the same as actual population counts. And so once the population data was late this time around because of the pandemic, because of fights over whether we were going to count everyone or just count citizens with the previous administration in Washington, D.C. And so the actual population data did not come out until the middle of August. Once that data came out, lawmakers saw that they had drawn districts that were wildly skewed in population. So one district would have 30% more than the district next door to it. At the state level, just at Congress, they have to be equal. At the state level, the standard is through several court cases that you can be off within a range of 10%. So 10% greater in one district, 10% less in another district. As long as you're within that range, you're okay. Some of the population numbers in the districts the first time around were 30% or more off. So they knew that that was going to cause a court challenge and be found, and it was recently just declared that that first set of maps is not constitutional by a 3-judge federal panel. And so there's a court case ongoing right now but in the meantime, lawmakers went back and convened in special session in August and September and redrew the districts based on the actual population data.
And Madeleine, did you say you have some maps that you could kind of show us and bring this to life a little bit? I think that might be really helpful as you're pulling. There's a couple of questions as you're pulling that up that might be answered, I think, through these visuals, but there's a question about are the large districts most effective? Are they most affected downstate?
Okay, can everybody see that?
We can.
So let me back out here a little bit. This is the congressional map that was just approved by the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate and sent to the governor for his signature a few weeks ago. So you can see this is, I believe that's District 12. 17 districts here on the left-hand side of the screen. Some pretty crazy looking districts. This is District 15. It goes all the way up to the, I believe this is the Quad Cities area, if I zoom in a little bit. Cuts literally from the western edge of the state to the eastern edge of the state down to close to St. Louis. Just kind of a wild looking district. But all of these districts have roughly the same population, but you can see some of the crazy shapes.
So is that what we're looking for? We're looking for the size and just sort of the split, like that purple is one district that's cut in between by that yellow.
When I click on it, you see it becomes outlined in white, and those are the district boundaries.
So why would it be not cohesive? Why would there be a section that kind of goes up into the middle?
Like this?
Yes.
So if you stop and think about this for a minute, what you see here is part of Champaign, Illinois, part of Decatur, Illinois, part of Springfield, Illinois, part of St. Louis, which are all urban areas, which tend to be more democratic. And then you see this district over here has big chunks of space that don't have any major metropolitan areas in them. And so one of our criticisms of this map was that it very purposefully tried to split and divide urban areas from rural areas at a time when in this nation we are already split and divided at levels unseen before. And this is only going to exacerbate the divisiveness that we're all experiencing in our politics. But this was done connecting all of these urban areas to create a district a Democrat could win.
Understood. So getting back to Claire's question where she's asking if most of the, she calls it gerrymandered districts, are affected downstate, would that be true? I guess if you zoom out and you kind of look at it, are the districts, they're much smaller in the northern part of the state. Is that because of population?
Yes, so they're smaller in the northern population part of the state in this. Sorry, this is very, map thing is very sensitive. It'll catch up to me here in a minute.
Yeah.
You can see, looking at it, that the districts in the Chicago and the surrounding collar counties are much smaller, but the population, the numbers of people living in all of these districts is pretty much identical. And so it's because there's such a greater concentration of people living in Chicago and the collar counties compared to the rest of the state. But you'll see as I zoom in here that these districts in Cook and the collar counties are also oddly shaped, to put it mildly. And in fact, we have a situation, one of the things that sort of surprised people was that they actually drew one district that has 2 Democratic incumbents in it. So the people in that district had to decide whether they were going to battle it out in a primary. In fact, Marie Newman was drawn into a district with the state's only Latino incumbent, Chuy Garcia. And she has decided, because in Illinois, you don't have to live in the congressional district that you run for, that she's going to instead run in the nearby 6th district and run against Sean Casten, because she doesn't want to get into a battle with the state's only current Latino incumbent. Let me see if I can find. So this is the 6th district.
The one with the white, right?
Outlined in white right now. And so Marie Newman, I believe, lives in LaGrange. Sean Casten lives in Downers Grove. So Marie Newman lives right outside of this district, but she's technically in the same district as Chuy Garcia, and she's decided that she's going to challenge Sean Casten rather than Chuy Garcia. And so
interesting. And yeah, there's some
Naperville.
There's a comment in the chat that this map really does put the issue into perspective, kind of going back to, how is it that the redistricting process is a transparent and fair process? I think what we're hearing is that there's interpretation, and the only way to really govern the interpretation of what the requirements are is through the legal system. And you're saying there are some active one or multiple lawsuits that are happening right now?
So at this moment, there are lawsuits challenging the constitutionality and legality of the state House and the state Senate maps. There are not lawsuits challenging the legality of this congressional map because it hasn't been signed into law yet by the governor. We may, in fact, see some court challenges of the congressional map after it's signed into law. But, there may be a determination made that despite how crazy this looks to most people, I would suggest, that it's perfectly legal, because it's not illegal or unconstitutional for a majority party to draw districts to their advantage. The US Supreme Court has said that it's not going to get involved in touching cases about, where politics is used as a basis for drawing districts. You have to have a situation where, there's racial gerrymandering or a violation of the Voting Rights Act of the US Constitution. In other words, preventing certain racial groups from having a chance to get fair representation and sway the outcome of an election if there are enough of them together and there are instances of racially polarized voting.
So and that's interesting, a question in the chat was around, is there not a federal remedy to help this what you're seeing here in the map and the way the districts, and you're saying no, not for political motivation, but yes, for more racial and equity type of issues.
Correct. And so, I would say that there is a federal remedy out there. Ironically, it's the Democratic Party nationally, which has been pushing for some voting rights changes. And you may have heard of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the For the People Act. There's been tremendous effort to try to get those through Congress and the United States Senate. And one of the provisions in one of those laws is to require that independent commissions, not politicians, draw congressional districts in every state nationwide. But there's roadblocks in the United States Senate that have prevented those from being signed into law to date.
Interesting. We have two questions from the chat. I'm going to go back for just a second and address one of the questions that popped up that you raised around someone running for our office in not their home district. What is the success rate? Do you have any knowledge of that on a candidate that runs outside of their home district?
I'm pretty sure that it's happened before. In fact, I don't know if I have a specific congressional example, but also back in the 1990s, 89, 90, 91, 92, I was covering politics for the Daily Herald, and one of the races I covered was between State Representative Penny Pullen and Rosemary Mulligan in the Des Plaines Park Ridge area. And the first time they ran against each other, they're both Republicans. It was a very close race. And so there was a recount and a challenge and huge battle. And at one point they literally said, we're going to flip a coin to decide who wins. Ultimately, Penny Pullen won the race in 1990, and Rosemary Mulligan vowed right away to challenge her and run again because she had been declared the winner on election night. In the meantime, that was a redistricting year. Or the year after was a redistricting year in 1991, and Rosemary Mulligan was drawn out of that district that she had previously run in and been declared the winner on election night, but not ultimately the winner after a long drawn out court challenge. So she moved and ran anyway. So I guess technically in her case, she moved, but I do believe there have been cases where people have run and won. You frequently hear that quote unquote phrase carpetbagger used when someone does that, which can become an issue in a campaign, but I don't know that it's always stopped people from winning.
Thank you for that. Just in couple questions coming that are very specific coming into the chat that I want to hit on. Can you talk about how many of the districts are entirely or partly within the city of Chicago? Hard to see on that map.
I'm sorry, are entirely what?
Or partly within the city of Chicago? How many districts are a part of the city of Chicago? Is it split up?
Boy, I've never had that question come up yet. So let's see.
Yeah.
Looks like this one touches Chicago. This one, I believe, is Robin Kelly's district. Also touches Chicago. 1, 2, 3, 4.
And then to that point, and I think this is where this question is kind of leading towards. Shui Garcia was commenting that the Latino district has been split into two. Does splitting the Latino vote weaken their chances of representation that represent their interests?
So this is a fascinating thing, right? Because Shui Garcia's district is kind of what's referred to as the earmuff district currently, because there's a big kind of circular area on the south side of Chicago where a lot of Mexican Latinos live. And then there's a little slivery, snaky, follows a highway part of the district that goes up to the north side of Chicago, where there's a grouping of a lot of Puerto Rican Latinos. And that district was actually created by court order to empower Latinos to elect, have an influence and elect someone of their choosing. In the intervening 10 years, that population has grown. And so during these hearings on the congressional map, some Latino lawmakers were advocating for the creation of this second Latino district and asking everyone who testified whether they supported the creation of that second district. Now, the tricky thing about that is that that second district is what's called a Latino influence district, meaning that it has 45% or greater Latino voting age population in it. But what we don't know is how many of those people in that district are citizens and will be able to vote. And so there's a lot of discussion right now about and concern that too many Latinos will run for that district. And then someone who is not Latino could enter into that primary. And because the Latino vote will be probably predictably splintered and split up amongst multiple Latino candidates, that non-Latino candidate could have a pretty decent shot at winning.
And just so I'm tracking, that is the interpretation, that is your interpretation for why that was split into two?
The reason why it was split into two was to create that second opportunity, because the Latino population in Illinois is growing and has grown more than other racial and ethnic groups in the state of Illinois. There's been a decrease in Black population in Illinois and a pretty dramatic, although not as dramatic as it once was, increase in the Latino population. And so many Latinos wanted and believe that they deserve a shot at electing someone from more than one district.
So actually kind of going, I think the question was around weakening their representation, but actually the idea would be it would strengthen. There'd be more representation.
That's why that second district was created, but it will remain to be seen from the election whether that actually occurs or not, that they elect a Latino to that district, as I said, because there are probably 5 or 6 Latino candidates thinking about running for that seat. And so the concern is that they will all split the vote and a non-Latino could win the primary because of that.
I love this comment, and it kind of leads me in the chat. It says, clearly this looks silly. And when you do zoom out and you see all the choppiness of the map, and the other comment where, you know, the picture is sort of worth 1,000 words here. I think that just kind of gets into just the process. And the question is really, is this kind of you've been looking at this for decades, you said, Is this sort of like kind of the worst you've seen it?
Yes.
Fair.
In a word, yes. You know, and I'm not the only one. You know, nationwide, this map has drawn attention. One of the groups we work with is the Princeton Gerrymandering Project out of Princeton University. And they analyze maps nationwide and score them and grade them on things like partisan fairness, contiguity, compactness, and every version of this map that was ultimately voted on and approved by the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate got Fs across the board from the Princeton Gerrymandering Project.
Do you have a link or something that could be shared to this audience just to have it? I think that would be a really great source. And you're saying that's a source that is, you know, it's bipartisan, but it's looking at the requirements that are considered transparent and fair and grading how Illinois did on this. Is that how to interpret that?
Yeah, it's nonpartisan, I would say, not,
Sorry,
not
nonpartisan,
bipartisan.
right.
Yeah. Let me, I'll just find it right while we're talking.
Yeah, if there's something to look at that in a little bit more detail, I think that's really intriguing. And that's just the facts.
Well, yes, facts as interpreted by this nonpartisan, really highly regarded, esteemed organization. Right? So here is their look at the, see, FFF.
And does this compare other states? That was one of the other questions. How do we rank among a lot of other states? Do we have any thoughts on that?
So not everybody's done with their redistricting yet. They're, because of the delay in the census data, they're not all done yet. So we don't have an overall final view. But I believe that we are in the company of states like Texas and Oregon and a few others that have been getting some pretty bad grades. Let's see what Texas shows. Oh, look, Texas got a C in competitiveness, so we're even worse.
And how are those public hearings that you mentioned that kind of go through, and the process that is supposed to happen is we as voters can attend these public hearings and voice our concerns. But can you go back to that? You mentioned it in the very beginning that was happening. It was likely happening when you were in the middle of your workday. It wasn't advertised. Like, how is it that we as a voter could have learned about these hearings?
You would have to literally go to the Illinois General Assembly website every day and look up the redistricting committees in the Illinois Senate pages and the Illinois House pages and hit refresh and see if any hearings had been scheduled. You know, they did reach out to groups like ours and other good government groups they know are paying attention and notified us, but really not without much advance warning. And we would go to these hearings and ask questions about when we might actually see a draft of a map and what else was being done to alert the public to this process. And literally the kind of answers we would get would be, thank you for your comments. When we know more, we'll let you know and we'll get back to you. Next person who wants to testify, please begin. So, you know, it was frankly disrespectful, and it was like talking to a brick wall.
And those that are drawing the maps again, could you, so Who's
Oh,
drawing?
it's essentially staff and experts that are hired by the majority parties in each chamber. And, it's all done in a locked room behind closed doors, and then they post it on a website. It's on these websites where I was just, let's see if I can. One of these. So this is the Illinois House Redistricting website. Put this in the chat as well. As you can see here, when they decided to release these, they would post them on this website. And, literally in several instances, they would post a draft of the congressional map and have a hearing on it an hour later, and then vote to approve it 2 or 3 hours later. So not much advance notice, no real effort to engage the public. Everything done during working hours for most people, except for the congressional map, I think, was approved by the Illinois Senate at 11 o'clock at night during their veto session. And the House approved it at 12:30 in the morning. Again, not a time when most people are paying attention. And, no accommodation made at any of these hearings for anyone who might speak a language other than English. No accommodation made for anyone who might be differently abled and need some other services in order to participate in this process. Hearing impaired, there was no one providing American Sign Language services at any of the hearings. And I'm, literally, we have a small staff. We were at every single hearing or monitoring them on Zoom. There were probably 60 hearings. No accommodation made for people who work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, or who might speak Spanish or some other language, or might, need other services.
So in this group, we were active in our communities, and it feels very much like, okay, do we just have to wait another 10 years? And there's a comment here in the chat that I just want to acknowledge. How do we begin to support change and stop this type of redistricting that's purely motivated by, power?
It's tough. It's going to be a long haul, and we need for everyone to become more aware of how awful this process is, and how hidden and non-transparent and unfair it is. And if you agree with me about all of that, then I need you to get involved now, and I need you to tell your friends and family and neighbors and networks. And we're going to need to get organized and outraged and essentially rebel, because the politicians of both parties do this, and they do it because they're getting away with it and no one is holding them accountable. And it becomes extraordinarily frustrating, because it's hard to hold them accountable because they're essentially picking their voters. So it's tough to threaten them that you're not going to support them when they've set the foundation and they've rigged the game to begin with. And so they know which party is going to win these districts. So, scientific poll after scientific poll has shown that people in the state of Illinois really want nonpartisan independent redistricting. Politicians have not cared. and go and do this anyway. So we're gonna have to get organized and rebel and try to force the issue. We introduced and drafted legislation, had a state senator introduce it, that would have required that they have a certain number of hearings, that they meaningfully engage the public, that there be at least a 2-week period from the time that they released a draft of a proposed map and when it was voted on. And they just, bottled that legislation up and refused to let it be heard and called for a hearing and voted on. So it's going to take all of us screaming about it from the top of our lungs that we demand better.
There's a question about, and you addressed a little bit about this, but maybe we could say more. What are some of the potential court challenges to those maps? You mentioned a few just a minute ago. Maybe just pause there for a second to reflect on that a little bit more. So who is it that would bring forth, a potential like lawsuit associated with some of the ways in which we think these redistricting have been, not transparent or unfair? Who?
Well, the suits that have been filed by the Illinois Republican Party, the minority party. These are against the state house and the state senate maps, not the congressional maps. Suits have also been brought, and they've all been consolidated, and they're being heard by this 3-judge federal panel right now, by the Mexican American Defense and Educational Legal Fund, MALDEF. Did I get that right? And also the NAACP recently joined in and filed suit and said that some of the districts in around East St. Louis were instances where some Black voters were what we call packed or cracked in order to preserve the reelection chances of some white incumbents. So again, those are cases where the claim is that protected racial groups had their rights violated. Unfortunately, you cannot really make a claim in court anymore to say that the partisan political grabbing has just gotten out of hand. The United States Supreme Court a couple of years ago flat out said they're not going to get into that, and that some level of partisanship is allowed in this process.
So is volunteering to become part of an organization that's really pushing lawsuits a good thing for us as activists? Is that a recommendation, or how do we get organized?
Well, I certainly would encourage, the League of Women Voters is one of our tremendous partners. Change Illinois has been working on this for quite some time with the League of Women Voters. We run something that we call the Illinois Redistricting Collaborative. And this year in particular, we've been meeting on Zoom every 2 weeks to talk over all of this and strategize and work together. Encourage all of you, if you're not already signed up, to go to the Change Illinois website, which is changeil.org, and sign up for our emails. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram if you do that stuff, or LinkedIn. And that's how we're gonna do this. We have to get organized by growing our membership and getting more people throughout the state involved.
And there's a question in the chat, sort of remind us why there was an effort a few years back to add a constitutional amendment to install an independent commission, why that failed?
There have been 3 attempts over the past dozen years or so. The League was leading the charge for one of the very early ones, but they got a late start. They were trying to actually collect voter signatures to get an amendment for an independent commission onto the ballot statewide. They did not collect enough voter signatures in the time required. Then there was an attempt by Change Illinois, before I was involved with the organization, to do the same. And the State Board of Elections ruled that some of the signatures were not valid. And so it got tossed from the ballot by the State Board of Elections. And then the third time, the powers that be in the Illinois House challenged the attempt to get the question onto the ballot, and it went all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court. And the Illinois Supreme Court is not supposed to be political, but it is. People run as either Democrats or Republicans for the state Supreme Court. And at that moment in time, the Democratic Party was in the majority, and the Democratic Party held the majority on the Illinois Supreme Court. And they determined that really that redistricting isn't, I mean, for technical reasons that would be too detailed and difficult to get into here. It's we're not like states in the Western United States where it's easy to get citizen initiatives onto the ballot. And so they essentially made it clear that unless the makeup of the state Supreme Court changes, it's probably not very likely that you can collect voter signatures to try to get an independent commission in front of voters that way. And so since that time, we've been trying to get it done by getting lawmakers themselves to make the changes, and that's fallen short too.
Yeah, and Claire, I'm just going to try and address your question here because I think it kind of gets at the heart of what we're talking about. But I think you're challenging, do people really want a fair system? Is that right? If you want to come off of mute, maybe you can clarify this. But the way I read your chat, you're saying, the polls are suggesting people want this, but in the atmosphere, in the hyper-partisan atmosphere of today, is that really still true? Do you want to clarify that a little bit?
Me or Madeleine?
Oh, Claire, do you mind just clarifying what your statement is? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I know you say it polls very strongly, Madeleine, that people want a fairer system. But I wonder, with this extreme hyper-partisan system, atmosphere that we all live in these days, is that what people really want? I mean, do you have a sense of what is really going on out there?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, we did a poll ourselves in 2020 to try to, in fact, persuade the governor that he should live up to his campaign promise to veto any partisan maps. And it showed historic levels of support for independent redistricting amongst Illinois voters statewide. 75% of the people polled who were Illinois voters said they wanted an independent commission to draw political districts instead of politicians.
Why? I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but why? That's an overwhelming response.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, I'm sorry, your question is what? Why?
Yeah, why? So if that's an overwhelming positive response, we want this, but do we understand why?
Because I think that people realize that the way it's being done is making our elections fairly meaningless. I mean, we already know the outcome before we bother to vote. And so people become so completely apathetic. And, our state unfortunately has such a reputation of corruption that I think a lot of people tune out and give up and don't pay attention and care. And so somehow we got to find a way to change that path. But to your point and to your question, Claire, I do think that one of the things that we heard and members of the majority party used to their advantage in this past year was, we're not going to stop doing this because more Republican majorities in Republican states are doing it. And so why would we disarm when everybody else is doing it and there are more of them than there are of us? And so that makes the case for why we need a national solution, at least for congressional districts, that nationwide it be mandated that we take this process out of the hands of politicians.
How likely is that?
Probably not very likely unless things shift in this next election. And, you know, historically, the party out of power in the White House does very well in off-year elections, which is what we'll have next year. So that would stand to reason that there'll be more Republicans elected, and they're already using gerrymandering to great advantage nationwide right now. So we've got a huge hill to climb.
Absolutely. And happy to take any other
I'm sorry to be such a
I know,
downer,
such a bummer. Yeah.
but I have to be honest.
I'm trying to figure out how we maybe wrap this into and here's what we can all do together. Just a few tactical questions, but we do have a few more minutes with Madeleine, who you've been amazing. You're a wealth of information. So I'll just offer it up there, maybe get some thoughts in now. If you want to ask a question, come off of video and come off of mute. Here's just a few quick ones for you, Madeleine, while people are getting their last thoughts of questions to ask you in. What was the vote count on the Supreme Court decision? Kay asked.
The one that I just referred to.
Kay, do you mind just clarifying?
There are nine Illinois Supreme Court justices. So the decision was 5-4 because there was a 5 Democrat majority. It was literally a partisan party line vote.
And John asked, does any state have independent redistricting?
Yes, and here's the odd thing. After the 2018 election, 5 more states' voters had the chance and took the chance to say, we want more independent redistricting done. And so right now in some of our neighboring states, that's happening. In Michigan, there's an independent redistricting commission drawing districts. I have relatives in Colorado who were involved in the effort in Colorado to bring independent commissions there. They have 2 commissions there, one for congressional districts and a second one for state districts. Ohio has kind of a unique hybrid system where they tried to kind of at least force the lawmakers to have incentive from both parties to make things a little bit fairer, and that doesn't seem to be working very well so far. Missouri took some steps toward more independent remapping, but then took some steps backward. But there are, I believe the current number is 11 states that have some form of independent redistricting. The one I'm most familiar with is California. I've had the pleasure of getting to know a couple of the commissioners who served on the first independent commission in California after the 2010 census. They've come to Illinois and done some public speaking and did some training for us. And they, had hearings all over the state. And California is a big state. They worked their tails off and drew districts and released draft maps and got some pretty negative feedback to those first set of maps. Went back to the drawing board, made some changes. And after this independent commission in California drew maps, there wasn't a dramatic shift in which party was in power, but there were more competitive elections. And in fact, the voters elected 9 more candidates of color at both the congressional level and the state level than when politicians had drawn the maps.
And that was California. That's intriguing. So I want to be respectful of your time, Madeleine, and we asked you to spend an hour with us, and we are at that time. I will do one last call. Are there any other questions? I tried to address all of them in the chat as we went, but if there's anyone that I didn't get, here's your final chance to ask Madeleine a question before we wrap.
And while you're thinking of that final chance, let me just try to end on a little bit more motivational, hopeful note. This is really the foundation of our democracy, and what we're seeing is a not very democratic process. But we cannot give up. We've got to get together and fight for a more equitable, fairer system, because it may seem like a very esoteric and distant subject, but it absolutely affects the kinds of policies that we see, the things that affect our daily lives, whether COVID is being addressed properly, whether violence in the city of Chicago is being addressed properly, whether you're happy with what's going on in your local schools. In one way or another, it all comes down to how those lines are drawn, who represents you, and whether you have any choices at the ballot box. And unfortunately, with the way these things are done, we don't have many choices, and our voices and our votes are essentially being suppressed and stolen from us. And so we really need to get organized and rebel and stop this. And I hope you'll join me in doing that.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. And to do that, is the best way to reach out to you at changeillinois.org?
Yep, I'm happy to put my email address in the chat and talk to any of you at any time. I may not always answer you right away, but I'm always available. And as I said, please follow Change Illinois on social media and sign up for our email on our website. I noticed somebody in the chat mentioned Paul Lawson, who's been a wonderful representative and meets with us every couple of weeks and is your expert on this topic. So also, of course, feel free to reach out to her. We've got some pretty more hopeful things going on in Chicago. We actually just supported the creation of an independent resident commission that drew a new ward map for the city of Chicago that looks much better than any of the ones the politicians are producing. So we're working hard to try to see if we can gain some traction for that right now.
And in the meantime, we'll do this again in another 10 years. So it gives us
absolutely,
enough time to prepare.
And let's do it before 10 years so that before all the redistricting is done, we can get you all involved in helping us fight for fairer maps.
You got it. Well, thank you so much, Madeleine, for your time. This was really eye-opening for me and for all of you, I'm sure, on the line. So thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for your willingness to spend the hour with us learning. I'll just do a quick close for everybody. The event was recorded, so we are going to be posting the event on our YouTube channel and promoting that. So you can look for that if there's anything you missed and you'd like to go back and watch. That'll be made available literally as soon as it replicates and gets posted onto our YouTube channel. So this week, our next event will be Monday, November 15th, where we'll be interviewing with Amanda Pankow of the Prairie Rivers Network, and we'll be discussing the Climate Energy Jobs Act. So watch your email, and we will be sending out a meeting invitation for that. So I'd like to just say thank you, everyone. What a wonderful night. Really appreciate all this information, and thanks again to Madeleine for attending and sharing your wisdom with all of us. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.